This is Jay Rogers. I'm the director of The Forerunner, and this is Ukraine's coming coup and neo-Nazi civil war. If you like this video, you can donate to us. You can like, you can subscribe. There's a little donate button up here that you can click on, and that will bring you to a site where you can donate either through PayPal, or if you don't like PayPal, there's credit card as well. So you just go here and type in as little as you want or as much as you want, and so on. Ukraine's coming coup and neo-Nazi civil war is an article I did about a week ago, and I've been working on it ever since, just kind of brushing up on some things, going back and forth with some experts in Ukraine, in Russia, people that work for the U.S. government, and so on. This is a collage of a photo. On over here we have a right-wing rally in honor of Stepan Bandera, and a tweet right here by General Valery Zaluzhny honoring the birthday of Ukrainian Nazi collaborator Stepan Bandera. That's celebrated each year with midnight marches on New Year's Eve. The first photo is from New Year's Eve. So what's going on right now is a power struggle among the Ukraine's ultra-nationalists, which are basically the only parties that control Kiev right now, are nationalist political parties. And you have like the ultra-nationalists, you have nationalists, and so on, but they all want to move Ukraine toward the West and toward a Ukrainian-only culture and exclude Russia and Russian speakers. It says tensions are mounting in Kiev amid concerns about a potential state coup, according to local and Western media reports. The rumors of a coup have stirred political discourse focusing on the stability of the current Ukrainian government. Valery Zaluzhny, a key figure in the Ukrainian armed forces, is in the spotlight. He is believed to be the potential leader of the rumored coup. The speculations about the coup could mark the beginning of the end of Zelensky's presidency. And even since I did this article, there have been other daily reports about this. Different things going on. These are rumors. I mean, don't take this with as gospel truth. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. But you can go to the article and you can click on the links, and you can also see, do your own research and see if any of this is true. This is the next article here. This is the quote from Valery Zaluzhny, and this was from last year about this time. He says, "I know I can beat the enemy, but I need resources." So this was an interview with The Economist. This is behind a paywall, but this is a little summary of it. This is Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny, said Russia will have a renewed attempt at capturing the Ukrainian capital, possibly in February or March. Of course, that never happened, but he asked for tanks, armored personnel characters, infantry fighting vehicles. We need ammunition. And his exact words were, "I know that I can beat this enemy, but I need resources. I need 300 tanks, 600 to 700 infantry fighting vehicles, and 500 howitzers. Then I think it is completely realistic to get to the lines of February 23rd, 2022. In other words, the pre-war Ukrainian lines. And he doesn't say that he wants to take Crimea or even the areas that Donbass that had already seceded from Ukraine, but just to the lines that Russia had taken since then. And then he says, "I get what I want, but it is less than what I need. It is not yet time to appeal to Ukrainian soldiers in the way that Mannerheim appealed to the Finnish soldiers. We can and should take a lot more territory." So what he's saying here is that if he doesn't get this shopping list of tanks, weapons, and air support, there was also air support in that as well. They had, in addition to the howitzers, they had Patriot missiles and so on. He's saying he might, by the end of the summer, be making a speech similar to that of another famous general who surrendered to the Russians named Mannerheim. And this was a Finnish general. And this was during the Finland War. In February 1940, it was called the Winter's War, in which Finland was aligned with Germany against the Soviet Union. And the Finns decided that they had to give in to the Soviet demands at that time. Finland is kind of interesting because first they were fighting a war against the Soviet Union, and then fighting an offensive war, a defensive war at first, then an offensive war, acting against the Soviet Union when Nazi Germany invaded, and then finally fighting alongside the Allies against Germany. So they kind of like switched sides a bunch of times, which is interesting. But getting back to the article, this is from an article, Kiev on Edge, rumors of a state coup threatens Zelensky's administration, and then the Economist article. Recently, there was another article by Seymour Hersh. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalist. And this article is called General to General. This is the actual Substack article. And in here, he actually talks about something that's very concerning, I think. He says, one American official involved early on in the General to General talks told me. He's saying that General Zaluzhny has already entered into negotiations with Russian General Valery Gerasimov. And then the peace terms would be that Ukraine cannot have NATO troops in the country. They could have some type of security arrangement as a token member of NATO, but not actually have armaments inside the country. And then the agreement would not allow NATO to place offensive weapons in Ukraine, but only defensive weapons. And that Russia would keep the 4 regions it has already taken, plus Crimea, which acceded to Russia in 2014. So supposedly this has been going on behind the scenes for a while. And Hersh says that there's no question that Zaluzhny had some help deciding to go public from key Americans. What was the objective of this amazing story? To get Ukrainian leadership, meaning Zelensky and his coterie, to agree to a settlement and realize that to continue the war was self-destructive. He said there was a bigger objective to get Ukrainian citizenry to the point where they would agree to negotiations to end the war. The problem is that there's a Ukrainian law, and this Ukrainian law says that it's a decree by Zelensky and the parliament. This is back in October 2022. So over a year ago, they passed a law saying that any talks with Putin are illegal. All right, which is kind of drastic, but that's basically what's going on there. So for this reason, I tend to doubt that Hersh's article is accurate. It might not even be half correct. Right, the article says that Zaluzhny is not negotiating with Putin, but with Gerasimov. And only Putin and the Russian Duma have the authority to negotiate a peace treaty. The army does not. And so, that being said, most people do agree that there are some behind-the-scenes negotiations taking place, or some type of discussions where the West is trying to get Zelensky out of power. And then there's been other articles saying that, Russia offered to Ukraine in March 2022, right after it invaded. They said, we won't annex any territory. The Minsk agreements have to be implemented. That was a kind of like a ceasefire in Donbass and giving the Donbass republics, Lugansk and Donetsk, autonomy. Ukraine would not have to recognize them as independent states, but they would have to allow them to have their own elections and so on. I mean, essentially to secede, but not to join Russia. And then Ukraine would stay out of NATO. And what they couldn't agree on was whether or not they would have a security agreement with the West. And that's kind of scuttled it. At that time, you see on this map right here, this was Russia had troops surrounding Kiev. They also had troops in Chernigov, Sumy, and these troops all withdrew at the end of the negotiations. And then Boris Johnson flew in from England. He talked with Zelensky in Kiev, and they scuttled the agreements. Later, there was a big talk of a counteroffensive, and the Russians withdrew from Kherson rather than risk this area. And what you have to understand is that a lot of these lines up here were not really territories that Russia had taken, but they're roadways. Like, they control the roads. And when they realized that Ukraine was not going to negotiate any further, they withdrew prior to that. But then they found out that Ukraine was not going to negotiate, and what they did was they fortified Donbass, which is Lugansk and Donetsk, and then these two republics. And then later they voted to join Russia. Later on, what happened is the Russians withdrew from Kherson for the same reason. They thought it was untenable to keep that line going with the troops they had. And then they were sort of taken by surprise in Kharkiv, and the Russians had to retreat. But it was pretty much a tactical retreat. They kept a very straight line, and ever since then they've been, taking back some of the territory that Ukraine has taken very slowly. First, the area which is known as Bakhmut or Artyomovsk, and then more recently Avdiivka, which is this area right here. So what I think is false about Hirsch's article is he says that it's the Russians that are looking for a peace deal in order to avoid a long stalemate. The Russians are actually advancing at this point, and the Ukrainian army is starting to run out of ammunition, run out of funds from the West, and they're starting to collapse all along the front lines. It's very dramatic what's happening right now, as a matter of fact. It's not so much that the Russians are taking a lot of territory, but they're grinding down what's left of the Ukrainian army. So instead, I think it's Zaluzhny that admitted, he said it would take a massive technological leap to break the deadlock. And he compared it to, we'd need something like the invention of gunpowder, like in the 1300s when the Europeans got gunpowder. That's how dramatic we would have to have. We'd have to have some type of a wonder weapon. Okay. So there's a bunch of reasons why we know that Russia is winning. There's a 7-1 artillery advantage. They have superior air power. And even Western sources are admitting this right now, that Ukraine can't win against the armaments that Russia have. So right now, Russia controls most of Lugansk, like 90% of Lugansk, most of Donetsk, and most of Zaporozhye, and most of Kherson. And these areas acceded to Russia in a referendum that occurred at the end of September and the beginning of October 2022. You can go to this link. It's a very good link. It shows you the whole history of the war. It's a good war map. At the same time, the sanctions, right? Russia has a military force of up to 2.2 million that they've just activated. They have a citizen population of over 150,000. If you include these areas here that they annexed, Ukraine's population is probably between 150 million. They have a military force of 2.2 million, a citizen population of 150 million if you include the new territories. And Ukraine has lost population. They now have a population of about 1/10 the size. I said 5 times the size. Let me see, where did I get? Yeah, 5 times the size. So it's at least 5 times the size. You'd have it's about 25 million to about 150 million. The other thing that's happened with Russia, really interesting, is despite the sanctions, they're now on the list of, this is how the economy has gone over the years. And even like since the war, they were at 5.3 trillion in the end of 2022, up from 4.4 trillion at the beginning of 2020. That's their GDP. Adjusted for purchasing power. And you can see like the largest two countries are the United States and China, followed by India, which has a population the size of China. Then we have Japan, and then Russia. So it's quite dramatic what's happened, and their economy is going to grow again in 2024, while Germany might slip into like 9th place behind Indonesia, and then by the end of the decade, Germany might be the only country in the top 10 of Europe. So that's what's happening with Europe. Europe is declining, Russia is rising. The other thing is that NATO is fracturing. All right, you have news articles out of Hungary, which say that Hungary threatens to block EU aid for Ukraine and veto its membership bid, even if they were offered EU membership and NATO membership. Both of these countries, Slovakia and Hungary, have said that they would block it. Same thing here. Slovakia may join 2 other NATO countries at odds with Zelensky. This has to do with Canada as well. I think this article mentions Canada, where the Canadians are very upset with Zelensky right now. We'll get to that in a minute. Poland has closed the border. The Polish-Ukrainian border will be, actually it's closed now already since this article came out. And there are farmers that have trucks that are blocking the truckers from Ukraine. They're coming into Poland, and that's going to really cause the collapse of the Ukrainian economy even further. Also, in July, the Polish parliament adopted a resolution that includes a recognition of guilt by Ukraine for how do you say this? Volhynian massacre, anti-Polish. I think I'm not saying that right, but the Volhynian massacre, an anti-Polish ethnic cleansings conducted by Ukrainian nationalists in German-occupied Poland in the summer of 1943. So basically, Ukrainian Nazis basically attempted genocide against the Poles, against the Russians, the Gypsies, the Jews, just like all the Nazis did. And they passed a resolution saying Polish-Ukrainian reconciliation, which representatives of both nations have been building for years, should also be included, and it should also include an admission of guilt and perpetuation of the memory of the victims of World War II. And then Canadian officials had to apologize for basically inviting a Nazi to come and speak to the Ukrainian parliament. Okay, and there's no photos of this here, but I've covered this in another video. So there's really no reason for Russia to negotiate at this point. I don't think that there will be any I think that what will happen at this point is that the Ukrainian army and their economy is going to collapse, and that Russia will be able to take more territory. They've already taken, about 17%. They took 20% in the beginning. Ukraine took some territory back. Our State Department has been saying that Ukraine has taken back, more than half of the territory. But like I showed you, it's really just Kherson region and this Kharkiv region up here. This here was never really occupied. They had troops in the area for a couple of weeks, and then they withdrew. For about, not a couple of weeks, for about a couple of months, from February through the end of March, and then they withdrew. But they've held all of this consistently throughout the war. And now they're going to take all of this back, too. I'm going to show you that in a minute. Okay, so what's going on right now is we have a general. This is Valery Zaluzhny, who really likes this guy Stepan Bandera. Okay, so this is an article giving the names of the different people who in the Ukrainian government who are admirers of these Nazis that fought against Russia back in World War II. And this is kind of an interesting little scuffle that took place. You can look at that yourself. All right, so what's going on now is that, what I believe is going to happen is that, Russia will negotiate, but they'll basically dictate the terms. They will demand territory up to the border of the Dnieper River, and then what's left of Ukraine after that point isn't that dangerous for the West. It also becomes entirely uninteresting to European except as a liability. So this is the map I made up. These are the current territories that Russia will fight for and will get. This is Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhia, as the Russians say, Kherson, and Crimea. And these have all acceded to Russia. There's a line that runs along the Dnieper River. It goes up like this. And then there's another line that goes like that. That's the battlefront. But Russia has about 70%, I would say, of the territory secured. And they're about to go all the way west to this area up here. Once they get to the Dnieper River, they will also retake Mykolaiv. They'll take Odessa, and they'll build this bridge going to the this area here. Transnistria has been not part of Russia, but it's an autonomous republic. It's not really recognized by that many countries, but they seceded from Moldova because there was violence against Russian and Ukrainian people living in this area. About half of the population, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but something like half of the population is either Russian or Ukrainian. And Moldova is neutral, but they were afraid that if Moldova joined Romania, that these people here would be in jeopardy. So they basically said, we never agreed that we wanted to leave the Soviet Union, even after the Soviet Union was dissolved. Kind of funny. And they held a referendum and they seceded and they petitioned to join Russia, but Russia has never accepted it. It's just like there's two regions of Georgia that have also petitioned to join Russia and they've never allowed it. So the other thing I think that will happen is that Kyiv will become basically a Russian principate, which means that there will be an appointed governor of Kiev will be like the acting president of Ukraine. And he'll basically be in charge of this entire area here. This might be called Kharkov region. There might be a Sumy region. I don't know exactly how it will go. It might just be called Greater Kiev or Kievan Rus or something like that. And then what will be left of Ukraine will be everything west of the Dnieper River out to Poland, and then this region of Poland, this region of Ukraine, and this region of Ukraine here will be not controlled, but they will have peacekeepers from Hungary and Poland stationed here as part of a security agreement. So in other words, like these two areas here will de facto be NATO allies. And they'll draw the line saying that, Russia can go no further than this. This will be demilitarized. And this will be demilitarized. And then this will be Russia proper. These regions will all join Russia. And I don't know what's going to happen to this region. But I don't think that Russia will take this part with also taking this part as well. Because, Kyiv is the capital. And they need to keep some type of a... everything will go back essentially to the way it was prior to 2014. All right. This is a picture. It's a truncated Ukraine. There's a Russian-aligned government installed in Kyiv with the southern and eastern regions acceded to Russia. That would be over here. The western regions could be monitored by Hungary and Poland. All right. Now, the next thing I think that would happen before all this is a coup, like we talked about. And even Zelensky has called this another Euromaidan. Euromaidan Part 2 or Part 3, depending on how you want to, whatever you want to call the Orange Revolution. There was an Orange Revolution in 2004, and they threw out a pro-Russian president who won the election, but they voted 3 times. They got him out, and they put in a guy named Yushchenko, and then Yushchenko had a term, and his policies were disastrous. He was very corrupt, and then they voted in the pro-Russian again. His name was Yanukovych. And then in 2014, there was a violent coup, which was sponsored by the United States and Victoria Nuland, the CIA, other Western money, George Soros, whoever you want to blame for it, and they got that government out, and they put in a anti-Russian government and started funding these neo-Nazis in the West to start to persecute Russia and so on. Russians in Ukraine. So this is another article. Zelensky is losing popularity because of his mistakes. This is another person, the mayor of Kiev, whose name is Vitaly Klitschko, and he is starting to oppose Zelensky. Basically, all the governors in Ukraine are appointed by the federal government, and there are no elections for governors, so they're all just kind of like yes men for Zelensky and the nationalists in Kiev. And then the only people that are opposing the corruption at this point are the mayors, and they're pro-Ukrainian. They're not pro-Russian, but he's saying that Zelensky's becoming increasingly isolated, autocratic. He's becoming paranoid, and support was very high for him in the beginning. Now they're about 60%. They're going to fall below 50% if they haven't already. Okay. Here's another article saying that Putin could win if Ukraine aid dries up, which it has. So Biden is getting very desperate. He's been basically shouting, Biden shouts, Putin must not win, Putin must not win. Right? So it's kind of a dangerous time because we don't know what the really strong neocons are going to do, but the handwriting's on the wall. So prior to 2022, before the war, the media ran very frequent articles about the Nazi problem in Ukraine. Here's one for March 2018. This is the famous photo. This is one of the marches at New Year's Eve. And this is actually Defender of Ukraine Day in Kiev, October 14, 2017. A little bit different. And you can read this article. But one interesting thing you can do, if you want to just type in like Ukraine Nazi problem. A lot of people, they hear this and they say, oh, that's ridiculous. That's just Russian propaganda. There might be some Nazis in Ukraine, but, that's just ridiculous. Zelensky's Jewish after all. However, if you were to go to 2022, or January 1st, 2023, and I made a mistake. Before 2022, so December 31st, 2022, all right, these are 2018, 2014, Ukraine's neo-Nazi problem. Ukraine's got a real problem with far-right violence. Azov fighters are Ukraine's greatest weapon, right? Dmitry claimed not to be a Nazi, but waxed lyric about Adolf Hitler as a military leader and believes the Holocaust never happened. The reality of neo-Nazis in Ukraine is far from Kremlin propaganda, and it goes on and on. You can find probably hundreds of articles. We are not neo-Nazis, I can assure you. We are simply people who want to change the country. Ukraine anti-Semitism, racism, and the far right. So there's tons of articles exposing this. But then if you were to go to after 2022, okay, then, oops. What happened here? Then things dramatically change. Okay, if you go to this point here, this is from the very. I'm going to change this to be real specific. I'm going to do March 2022 because that's after the war started, and I'm going to go up to this year, 2000. I'm going to go to 9/1/2023. Right. Ukraine's neo-Nazi problem is real, even if Putin is using, here's a fact check, right? Putin has the gall to say he's denazifying Ukraine. It's a lie. All right. And it basically, photos of Nazi symbols in Ukraine are shared out of context. So it's kind of like, yeah, they have some Nazis, but no, Ukraine does not have a real neo-Nazi problem. Ukrainian Azov Battalion denies neo-Nazi association. It's complicated. Russia is serious about denazification. It should start at home. Putin doesn't combat Nazism. So it's a lot of coping, basically. And then if you go from September of 2023 up to the present, you're going to find a mix. And the reason for that, right, Canadians, Nazis in Ukraine, Ukraine's problems with neo-Nazi, far-right politics, Canadians' Ukrainian Nazi fiasco raises even more troubling issues, right? So he's hugging a Nazi. This is Trudeau hugging which literally happened. I mean, literally hugged a Nazi and presented him to the Canadian Parliament. And they presented him as a man who fought against Russia in World War II. And then later they claimed that, or they fought against the Soviets in World War II. And then later they claimed that they had no idea that he was even on the itinerary, which is ridiculous. They knew very well who he is. Anyone that fought against the Russians in World War II on the side of Germany was a Nazi. That's how that goes. They weren't fighting independently. So people knew about this. And for some reason, they were invited into the Canadian, right? Yet again, inconvenient facts were dismissed as Russian propaganda. Okay, so that basically just gives you an idea of what's going on. So we have to ask this question, all right? You know, back in the day, Ukrainian nationalism took the form of oppressing Russians in Donbass, closing Russian-speaking schools everywhere, death squads killing pro-Russian journalists. This is the reason why I can't name the names of my friends that that collaborate with me on these articles. There's been a permanent militarization of the police, secret trials, expulsion of Russian-speaking people, persecution of other minorities such as Jews and Gypsies, adoption of Western degenerate policies. I should take this out because it's not just the neo-Nazis that are enforcing the policies, it's the whole country. And actually the neo-Nazis don't like homosexuals, so I kind of is misleading there. I'm going to change that. Recently a turn against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is true. They started arresting priests. So the question isn't, how bad is it? It's how bad will it get? And what should we expect as the society further breaks down and the West abandons Ukraine? The problem hasn't gotten better. It's only increased, and it has to be addressed. So who's going to do that? Although it sounds cruel in 2023, self-cleansing is the ideal way, much like the human immune system that eliminates every sickness from within. Moreover, Russia has a similar problem. They're now in the middle of a discussion of what to do with the part of the Russian society that didn't support the war. They've had these oligarchs that purchased multi-billion-dollar companies for a few bucks, basically bribed people into getting hold of these huge companies. They've basically raped the Russian people back in the 90s up until the present time. There's former government officials, famous artists and bloggers who have turned against Russia, and then people who have, gone on the internet and found ways to do sabotage against, and got, basically were promised that they get paid a few $100 if they did this, something like that. So that's all being prosecuted in Russia right now. We also have on both sides soldiers returning from the war with thousands of unregistered firearms. Maybe not so much in Russia, but definitely in Ukraine, because there's already lots of firearms in Ukraine. So it could be a real war with some real battles. There definitely will be a political civil war in Ukraine coming up, but it could break out into violence. In Russia, it might just be simply that the disloyal part of society is, banished from the country or dishonored in some way. So if that sounds far-fetched to you, I want you to think about for a minute what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan after the U.S. pulled out troops and ceased military aid. Same thing. So if you're sympathetic to Ukraine, pray for them. I have friends, very good friends in Ukraine. Be sympathetic to the Ukrainian people, but not to this neo-Nazi element in the government, not to Zelensky, not to Zelensky, not to his party, because they're controlled by these ultra-nationalists, okay? The same thing, Russian people, Putin's party, United Russia, I'm sympathetic to their cause. But, the liberals, the ultra-nationalists, that, there are people that hate Jews and Ukrainians in Russia. There are communists in Russia who are atheists, all right? There are extremists who are minorities within each country, but, they wield too much power. We only have to go back to the, there was a Kiev Maidan back in 2014, and the West Ukraine project was not to get a victory militarily against Russia, but to enforce sanctions. And they thought that they could enforce some type of a Moscow Maidan, and they'd have some faction which would topple Putin. There's all kinds of, theories about what actually happened with Yevgeny Prigozhin back in the summer on June 24th. I remember that very well. Okay. And this is an article back from that time you can look at if you don't remember that. But people in the West knew about this. Okay, they knew that our politicians knew well ahead of time that this was going to happen. They were briefed on it by the CIA. And there's been some speculation that that was a coordinated effort, and that, basically there'd be these sleeper cells in Moscow. There's another theory that says that Moscow allowed it to happen so they could expose the sleeper cells. And, they had people that are firing drones and things like from within Russia. So right? If that actually occurred, that would never have made Russia safer for the West. I'm telling you. The ultra-nationalists and the communists would have taken over, and then we would have seen a real war. You think that there's a war now? There would have been a real war. Okay. But thankfully, United Russia is still and United Russia is Putin's party. They're still in control. And they've been strengthened, and, Putin will win with over 80% of the vote come March. He'll have another term as president. So America's leaders are stupid. Their leaders are very smart. Ours are stupid. And Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Victoria Nuland, Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken, they are as dangerous as a monkey with a razor blade. Okay, I don't know about Harris. I wouldn't say that about her, but she's not in the loop. Joe Biden's not in the loop either. He's basically controlled by Blinken and Sullivan and Nuland. But okay, so I encourage all Ukraine supporters, look at the big picture. Look at all the wars that have been lost by America since Vietnam: Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Russia, now Gaza. They're all due to the fact that they've tried to create this neoconservative world order, right? They wanted the United States to rule the world, and George H.W. Bush or W. Bush, or they've tried to work with Europe, the EU, and NATO to try to create a Western neoliberal globalist alliance like the Clintons, Obama, and the Bidens. I say the Bidens because his son is very much involved with that as well. So now all this is collapsing. All right, we overextended our military. We devalued our currency to do it. We've run up debt. And so now, instead of taking steps to prevent something very bad happening in the long term, we have only accelerated it. And so now what we do is we listen to our leaders. There's this axis of evil in the world. They must be stopped. And none of these countries have any threat to the United States militarily. Okay. So here's a couple articles for you again. This is, what happened, right? This is an article from back in 2014. This is basically saying this is the crisis. This is what that would sound a very good article. Look, access behind a paywall. But it's saying our strategy basically was to turn these nations into pariahs. And then the wars that result from this, right? This is a good 500,000 civilians, 3 to 4 million people have died from our wars since 2001. Okay. This is an interesting quote by Henry Kissinger. To be an enemy of America can be dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. What we do in the end is we support these countries to, these proxy wars in these different countries. We support, Iran to be against Iraq, then Iraq to be against Iran, then we fight Iraq, and then we always turn on the leaders that, America's presidents have always abandoned every country they promised to help in the end. And they've lied about it. They've lied about every war that we've ever had. And people come to find out that they were lied to, but then they believe the next lie. What's going on right now is that when these leaders go overseas, they're getting snubbed. They're kept waiting a day. We're not going to meet with you. Or the Arab leaders that the United States is dependent on because of the petrodollar, they don't want nothing to do with Joe Biden. They hate him. All right. So what we're headed toward, what's going on right now is the clash of civilizations and the multipolar world. This is an excellent book, and I'm actually writing a book which is kind of based on the same ideas. But the idea is that, for most of history, global politics have been multipolar and multi-civilizational. But in modern times, Westernization tried to produce this universal civilization, but it didn't work. And so now the balance of power is shifting back towards Asia, towards Islam, towards Africa and the global South. And, universalism and globalism is not working. So the survival of the West depends on Americans affirming Western identity in our own civilization rather than trying to push our civilization on everyone else. So we've lost our civilization. We hate our civilization. I remember a few years ago, they were canceling Western civilization courses on college campuses. And now, they're freaking out and saying, we're going to lose Western civilization if Putin wins in Ukraine. So the unipolar world died on February 22nd, 2022, and what we have today is a multipolar world. Okay, so this is a great article. Yes, the world is multipolar, and then there's kind of a debate down below here where they have different articles. Superpowers in the world, right? Hope this is new. Let me see if you go down to the bottom, there's the counterpoint. No, the world's not multipolar. America's too scared of the multipolar world, and the GOP plan to bring back a unipolar world. So even though they're opposing it, they're not going to succeed, right? There's other major powers that have emerged. They're too big to fight each other right now. And so we'll have all these little regional conflicts, so along the lines of what Huntington calls cleft nations or cleft civilizations, like Israel, Ukraine, Niger. So they represent the fault lines between great civilizations. The West and the East, the Muslim world and the Western world, Muslims and the Western world and Africa and so on. Russia is a civilization state, and they have permission now from all the other civilization states, except for the West. And they will order their world. China will order their world. India will order their world. Arab League will order their world. They'll end up dictating the terms of peace for their own regions. That's what's happening right now with meetings between Putin and Xi and the Arab leaders. They are going to dictate the terms of peace in their own regions and push out the United States. Okay, so no matter how you view this, if you think it's good or bad, what you have to accept is that our legacy media is an extension of our State Department. They just repeat the Pentagon's talking points, and they've lied about Vietnam, they've lied about Israel, Afghanistan, they lied about Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya, Niger. They continue lying with a straight face, but what's amazing to me is not that they're lying, but that the media just goes along with it. There's no opposition media except when you get out of when you get into like alternative media. And, what amazes me is that people believe it still. So I, really encourage your comments on this article. If you want to go to the website, leave me a comment on the video as well. But this would be an interesting thing to save. You can download this if you want and come back in about 2 or 3 years and see if this is accurate.